Hello, everybody, and this time we will be talking about the latest thinking. And we have here, as always, Peter and Sophie, and we will talk about something that is really on the news, the Brexit, that was on the news some time ago, and now the election and new President Trump. So we are going to talk about the 9 beliefs that change with the Brexit and with Trump. And for that, I will start with Sophie. So what is your first belief that have changed?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm broadcasting from Sweden today, and I've been following quite closely what happened after Brexit and Trump. And my first point is about social media and the beliefs among the leaders in tech, specifically the ones that are based in San Francisco. Many of them, they had as a vision when they started their tech company that they're going to change the world. And what happened in the last few years is that they have helped to change the world, and they don't want to have anything to do with it any longer because they say they just provide the platform and they don't want to take any responsibility. So they had, like, their values started with creating change, and they did create a lot of change thanks to the platform they provided to the people. And now they don't want to have anything to do with it.
Okay. That's an interesting question, because also there is being a kind of devil's lawyer. Well, we can say, well, cinema has been used in the same way. You got the Nazi movies that were, or the radio that was used in propaganda, and it is a platform. So now and then there was a platform, and then people regret there is this platform. So there is a platform. Okay, Peter, what is yours?
I just want to make a comment on Sophie's point, because I think one of the things I often say is that technology is an amplifier. So all that technology does is it kind of makes what is already there even bigger. So obviously the social media has just amplified what's going on really in the world in terms of what people think and how they behave, and now it's all out there in our faces, whereas before we could sort of pretend it wasn't there. So like it or not, we're just getting stuff amplified back at us, I think. My first one was that you cannot assume that you know what your friends and family are thinking, or your work colleagues are thinking and voting, and why they might do that. So here in the UK, it was fascinating how the discourse was going on about Brexit, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and so on. And it became very polarized. And of course it's funny because you've got this simple vote. You have a piece of paper with 2 boxes on it, and you have to put a cross in one of the boxes saying that's what you want. And yet, as we all know, it's incredibly complicated. There are so many implications whichever way you go. And I've always been quite fascinated by the whole debate, because quite frankly I can see pluses and minuses with both. But what's interesting is when it polarizes, then it's like the people who take a point of view, like Britain should stay part of the EU, therefore anyone who thinks that Britain should even consider leaving is crazy and clearly very racist, and they'll put a whole lot of labels on people who think that way. And it's interesting to me because the kind of labels that are used for people who would vote to leave are completely not true for someone like me, and yet I voted to leave. So people who know me or think they know me have a view, and they look at me and just assume that I would have voted to stay because of my values and everything. In fact, a friend of mine was telling me how she was going down to the pub with this guy that I also know, and he was carrying on about these crazy people who voted to leave and how stupid it was, because he was making the assumption that she would think the same way. And then she turned to him and said, well, actually, I voted to leave, which stopped him in his tracks. But the point is that we have a judgment about people and we don't know the whole story. And I think that's really interesting. So I think it's a wake-up call to all of us, to, not to just put people in boxes because of what they may or may not have voted, because it's far more complicated. And if anything, what we need is curiosity, not judgment, to try and understand what was behind someone's thinking. We need a lot more of that healthy discourse. So that's mine.
Okay, thank you very much. I got a similar episode in Romania 1 year ago exactly, when I was sitting at breakfast table at the university, and I was sitting with another American professor, a very old guy, clearly a very wise guy, and we are talking, and we've met before, and suddenly I discovered that he's a really, really first time Trump supporter.
Yeah.
So, and the idea would be that, but he's not a redneck. So what the hell? And suddenly, here it was, a person that was used to go around the world, that was not close-minded, and suddenly he was not a supporter. Let's say from the last months or weeks, or no, he was last year, the beginning of the year, he was already a big supporter. So those boxes sometimes surprise you.
And I like that. I think there's so much more to people and politics that we don't know, and I think it's really important to keep an open mind and be curious. It doesn't mean you have to change your values or endorse or agree with something. It's just, it's interesting to learn.
Yeah, and that connects with one belief that I think that went down, is that everybody thinks like me. So normally across our life, we tend to surround ourselves with people that think like us. So the interesting thing is that Facebook does exactly the same thing.
Yes.
And that was the shock for everybody, is that there are people that don't think like me, because we got used to, in the physical world, to get information and opinions from people that are more or less like us. So the thing is that in the social media, in Facebook especially, that is now a big source of information, the feeds are from people that interact more with us, meaning likes and shares, or even check our profile more. So it's people like us. So it creates a misconception that everybody is against this, or everybody's in favor of this. So we are nowadays living in a kind of amplified, because I agree with you, Peter, that technology amplifies what we already have in the physical world. So we have these amplified bubbles, because our bubbles before were about 10 people, 5 people, and now they might be of hundreds of people, or even thousands of people is the size of our bubble. And we get even more the notion that everybody is like us. So it is, I think, in the 21st century, in order to understand better the world, we have to challenge ourselves and talk to people that we know that have opposite views.
Yes.
That have, in order to understand what is really happening, because the world is not all composed by our own clones. So we need to challenge ourselves. We have to go to environments, meaning on Facebook or physically, to understand the world. One of the things that I do, it's a small trick. I use this app, that platform that is like a kind of filter for Twitter. So I have lists, and small thing that we can do is we can, for instance, follow completely opposite media. So it's very interesting if you follow CNN and Russia Today, BBC and Al Jazeera. So it is interesting because your vision of the world is a little bit different, because there is no complete source of truth. There is always a little bit, even from one that is absolutely controlled by something, you get something that actually is a different vision. And by the way, it might be not true, but it is true for some people. So in order to understand their process, you have to see, and not to say, no, I don't see that because I don't want to be confronted with untruth or false statements or whatever. No, for many people, those are true statements. And to understand their process, you have to see them. So, Sophie.
Can I just add one thing to that, please? The other thing we need to know, and it was an interesting discovery to me, that what Google serves up to us when we type in something, it knows us, and it knows what we think about and talk about. So we're not just objectively getting stuff, it's doing that. And there's a great TED talk about that, about how Facebook and Google and all of these social media forms and search engines serve up to us things based on what it knows about us. So, for example, two people, in the talk, he said as an example, two different people typed in Egypt into their search bar, and one got lots of information and articles about the Arab Spring, and someone got a whole lot of information about holiday resorts. And that's based like purely on what they've searched for before.
Yeah, like my first point was about that the social media platforms say, no, we don't have anything to do with what's happening, but they are programming the algorithm to fit their business purpose, which is to sell advertising. So they have something to do with it.
It definitely, that goes on, but in addition to that, the way it's structured, ostensibly to give us the service, well, I'm a person who wants to explore places to go for holidays, but it's not telling me about the Arab Spring because it knows that I want to know about holidays, whereas someone who's interested in politics will get more feeds coming in related to politics. But the thing is, we start to believe that is the world out there, when in fact the technology platforms are giving us back our own thinking, which is what Philip's point was. Yeah, fascinating.
Thank you. Sophie, your turn.
Yeah, thank you. There's a Swedish word for what you just described, Filipe. It's called the opinion corridor. So you're walking down your own little corridor where everybody has the same opinion as you. It's been used quite frequently.
I bet that is a word with 25 letters.
It's no, it's not. It's the same. It's opinion corridor, but only Swedish spelling. So my second point is about our beliefs in petitions and marches has changed. So before Brexit, after Brexit, before Trump was elected and after Trump was elected, there has never been as many petitions that people are signing. And right now there's a petition in the UK which is asking the government to cancel Trump's invitation to the UK, and they don't want to embarrass the Queen. And over 1.8 million people have signed it. So we have definitely changed the way we look at the masses and how we can create change together. And I listened to a person from the Oxford Internet Institute who's done a lot of research into the petitions. And most of them, they will go nowhere. Like 98% of all petitions that are on the internet will go absolutely nowhere. But when one started to trend, the trend is like slightly up, slightly up, slightly up, and then woo! And then everybody signs it for like a week. And then people stop being activists. So I think we've changed the way we are believing in how to do things together. And petitions are not that efficient. I do believe that marches, though, that as the women marches around the world, they are quite, they're physical, people meeting up in real life, people signing together, speaking together, and that has another impact. So we need to look at what's going on online and how can we make this physically valuable so it stays longer. And that's why we need more organizations that are organizing people. They are needed. So all NGOs, volunteer organizations, and things like that. I think they can do a better work to get people together.
Mm-hmm. Well, I only have a small comment to that, is that I see petitions and a lot of people are getting furious in social media, a phenomenon that I call drive-through democracy. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to get into the trouble of sitting at the table, ordering for a menu. You want only to have the food inside your car and go through it. So that's it's a drive-through concept. Okay, Peter, tell me more.
Okay. Well, it kind of builds on Sophie's point, I think, because traditionally people have tended to see, a lot of people tend to see politics as pretty boring and pretty predictable, and they just get on with their lives and they don't often have particularly strong views. And obviously with 2016 we've seen some really significant, dramatic changes in the political world, things that may not a lot of people didn't predict. So no longer is it predictable or even boring, because we've set the scene for some dramatic unfolding in the coming months and years. I mean, here in Britain, of course, we've got the Brexit thing, and it's now been ratified by Parliament, so it is definitely going ahead, and it's going to be a quite a long process. But I find the whole thing fascinating. I'm a business psychologist. I'm interested in influence and control and power and how that all works, and the whole social movement and how people interact and make decisions. And I think it's going to be hugely entertaining. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be stressful. There's going to be a lot of fear, but also a lot of excitement about, creating a different kind of world. So I think in many ways it's good. More people are taking interest, get engaged, they get passionate. And we don't really know how things are going to play out. It's quite fascinating. Things could get worse, things could get better. I suspect it'll be a bit of both. But one comment I want to make about the passion and the emotion is that, and we're seeing lots of it at the moment, and the danger with emotion, and this is true for all of us in any part of our lives, is that emotional things start to make us slightly unbalanced. Coming back to the earlier point about people having a view, polarizing it, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, it actually stops us thinking clearly, and it also makes us easy to distract. There's a couple of things going around on social media at the moment saying that the immigration ban in the US is actually a kind of a distraction, and there's actually more sinister things going on behind the scenes that we should be more concerned about, because the immigration thing, whilst that's is concerning, it's kind of it's been set up as a distraction. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but what I do know is that when people get really emotional and focused on one issue, it does make it very easy for the people in power to go off and do a few other things. And the journalists aren't even looking there. The journalists are looking at the petitions and the marches in the streets and the protests about one emotive issue, and they're not actually looking at other things going on. And that's very dangerous. And we're also very easy to manipulate. When we get emotional, we get so unbalanced and so almost irrational, whatever our beliefs are, that people can play with us. They can make us do things that normally we probably wouldn't do. And I know that from personal experience, whether it's fear or whether it's excitement, emotion takes over. So I think whilst it's very entertaining, I think we all need to just take a breath and, take a longer view and keep things in perspective and be curious about what else might be going on.
You are talking about magicians.
That's exactly it. That's what magicians do. That's what I was going to say. Magicians have a very clever way of directing our attention to something and then meanwhile do something else. And voila, you have this thing that you didn't expect. And very much the tactics of magicians can be used by people in power. And I think we just need to be very vigilant about that.
The thing is that in that the media has a big role, but I think one of the big casualties of these beliefs is the media, because the media had this, in my view, and this is a very personal view, the media has two big trends. One is that points normally a little bit to the left. The second one is that they strongly believe that they are part of the cultural elite and they define what is the elite. And what they did during a long and slow time was to disengage from the audience.
Yeah.
So because they have this kind of superiority idea that, well, I know what is better for the audience. I understand them. I will give them garbage when they need garbage, and I will give them culture when they need culture. I know what they need. Instead of doing a kind of marketing approach and trying to involve also the audience.
And they start to live in their own bubble.
Exactly, because if you start seeing, for instance, guests, for instance, in talk shows and everything, you will see that you get invited to a talk show because you have a talk show to invite the other, and suddenly you have that bubble and you don't understand anything from the world, and you live normally in a bubble that is big urban area, that your problems are the biggest problems. There is no rural area, there is no other ways of life. You have a diversity of friends in terms of gender, race, everything, and you don't understand people that don't have that diversity as a world. So you don't really understand the world, and your role is to talk about the world and to give opinions, and those opinions are more and more based on beliefs and wishful thinking. So most people said Trump will never win.
Yeah.
That was not analysis. That was wishful thinking the whole time. And that was a big mistake. And when Trump is elected, it was like the king is naked.
Yeah.
Because everybody said that wouldn't happen. Why are you here? What are you doing? So it is very strange. So this is very, very problematic, because also their, let's say, credibility to say, no, but this is wrong. You said that was wrong before, and it was right. And now what? Why are you right now and not wrong? Because you completely missed the target before. So I think the big casualty of these changes, and the same happened with the Brexit.
Yeah.
The media was wishful thinking.
Yeah.
No. Of course, it will not happen. It happened. So I think the biggest casualty is the belief in media.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Sophie, you're third and last.
Yeah. My last point is about science and statistics, experience and evidence. And I wonder if these things will have any value in the future. After Brexit, there were lots of different statistics that were floating around on the internet that were just grabbed from wherever. No truth, no substance, no experience, no evidence, whatever. And Trump, he refuses to listen to science and scientists. And all scientists are really upset and angry about this, that they don't have a say at all. And Trump doesn't listen. He's just ignoring their evidence. And I'm my wishful thinking is that it will work again, and that science and scientific evidence will work again. But at the moment, it doesn't have high status at all when it comes to politicians who would like to run the show their way.
Okay, another casualty of this process. Peter.
Yeah, and just building on that point, Sophie, is that science itself is prone to corruption by human thinking. You know, when I was at university, I studied psychology and anthropology, and it was fascinating to actually step back and look at the scientific process. And in theory, scientific should be completely objective. But unfortunately, science is done by these creatures called human beings with particular predispositions. And one way or another, they can use science consciously or unconsciously to reinforce a particular belief. There are lots of examples where there have been experiments done and people don't get the result they want. So they keep looking until they get the result they want. And when they get the result, they publish that one and they don't talk about the other ones so much. Now, of course, in theory, it's meant to balance up because others do, you know, peer reviews and critical reviews and look at other research. So I do think there is merit in it. I'm not saying science is a waste of time, but I think we can be very naive to think that science is pure because it's not. You know, even the pharmaceutical industry, there is a lot of drugs that get onto the market which don't have a particularly strong impact, but they've managed to work out a way to get those drugs out and marketed. So
right, well, I'm not saying that the science behind many medical companies are all right or anything, but I think it's tragic that there are so many deniers of for instance, the environmental crisis, that they're just denying it.
Yeah,
and I think it's tragic.
Okay, and you know, it's interesting to see when we use the word denier, that in itself is a loaded word, because if I say you're a denier of something, what I'm saying is that there is a fact and you are denying the fact. And I think that's also dangerous because once again we're contaminating the conversation a little bit. So climate change is a classic example, and we could do an entire hangout on climate change. Now, I've for years bought into the notion that climate change is happening and that it's human created. And yet in the last couple of years, I've come across people who I know and respect who are not, you know, anti-environmental. My late father being one of them. My father's taken a long-term interest in environmental protection and all of that stuff, more than a lot of people I know. And yet he actually is called into question the quality of the science that's being done that says climate change is created by mankind. My uncle's more of a left-wing science teacher. He's also taken that view. Now, I'm not saying they're right and the predominant view is wrong, but I think it's really important to maintain an open mind.
Yeah, of course, you should have an open mind, but like when this climate agreement has been done on a global level and then someone wants to trash it, I think it's a weird way of using science to deny that. And I am very skeptic to many medical drug companies, and I think their business model is quite ugly. So it's nothing to do with them, but will scientists, will they have any kind of say in the future? And we don't know.
Well, you're making a very valid point, and I'm not disagreeing with it. The thing about what Trump has done, I think, is by and large it is unhealthy. I think it's. I mean, Trump to me is a caricature of human ego, the worst of human ego. You know, we all have ego. We all do these kind of things in small ways, and he's playing it large. And I personally think agreements around reducing CO2 and all of that, even if climate change isn't man-created, I don't think it's a bad thing because it forces us to look at cleaner energy, better ways of doing things. So I'm all for that. So anyway, you do make a very important point, and I think we'll have to watch that one closely. My final point builds, I guess in a way, Philip sort of covered it really, but I guess I'll reiterate it, that those that are comfortable with and those who benefit from the status quo will think that they can continue to simply ignore and avoid the sections of the population who are struggling, whether that's in your own country or whether it's in the world. And I think it's not sustainable. And I think what's great is it's all bubbling to the surface now. And, you know, the whole thing around political correctness and kind of the pendulum swang to a point where people weren't allowed to even express their anxieties, their frustrations and their concerns. Well, you know, we're not allowed to say that. So what they've done now is they've expressed it through the ballot box, both in Britain and in America. So, you know, we can't, the belief is that we can just go on and ignore these people or pretend they don't exist. And as Philip said, the media has you know, built that illusion too. And now that illusion's coming to an end. Now, the interesting point is that a lot of the people, see, Trump rode to office on the basis there are a lot of disaffected people in America. The irony is that I don't think Trump is the person to fix that. And they are going to eventually be incredibly disillusioned. You know, I think his idea of bringing back, you know, jobs to America and all of that, you know, I think it's well-intentioned. I think it's a nice idea, but they're not addressing a couple of key facts. Number one is that if you bring the jobs back to America, it means the cost of manufacturing is going to go up, and therefore Americans won't be able to buy their iPhones for $500. They'll have to pay $1,000. And, you know, no one's really talking about that. Secondly, and I saw a great thing on social media the other day, because there's a guy, Scott Santens, who's pushing for us to rethink the whole concept of work. And we need to look at having a universal basic income for every person. And he's got this thing about, there's a Twitter handle called Human versus Machine, and regularly you'll see little things pop up showing side by side a video of a machine doing a job and a human doing the job. And it's moving into all sectors. So basically, the biggest stealer or thief of jobs isn't the Mexicans or the Chinese, it's technology. And it's happening right under our noses. And so, you know, do you know what the biggest category of job is in America? No. Any idea? It's no. Truck driver. It's transportation. Now, we know that automated vehicles are coming. You know, whether it's 5 years or 15 years or 20 years, automation is coming, which means that there's going to be a huge number of people put out of work. Blue-collar workers who can't get jobs because technology has replaced them. Trump isn't talking about that. And so whether it's within, you know, a couple of years or 5 years, people will realize that this isn't the answer. And the conversation is about the wrong thing. It's not about immigrants. It's not about cheap imports, offshoring. It's about technology. And we have to face that. And what will happen, you know, sooner or later, those people who did support Trump, ironically, are at the other end of the spectrum, the power and wealth spectrum from him, they'll begin to realize that he isn't the Messiah because he doesn't have the answers. At the moment, they will continue to believe it. So he's already hugely unpopular, but that's going to be a lot worse. So he's going to pay a price one way or another, I think. It won't be pretty, but it will be entertaining. I'm signing off.
Okay. Peter, actually, I'm going to pick on the first belief that Sophie talked about, and it's about the platforms, the social media. I told that the first casualty was the media in this process, because people would say some years ago or some months ago, it's on the press, so it's true. And started to change, so it's all over Facebook, Twitter, so it's true. And now we talk about fake news on the media, so on social media. So the second casualty is actually the social media. So because we were fed with a lot of fake news, very well put it in the certain moments, so to change polls to change the idea. So it is interesting how the fake news are working, and you can notice that it is changing on the mind of people, because in 2016 you got the death of, for instance, George Michael or David Bowie, and the first comments were,
Is it true?
Is it true?
Yes.
So before it was like, oh my God, oh, it's because several people died in 2016 and years before several times, and they are still alive. And so now the first thing that we get is like a kind of, is it true? Is it true? It's not like, oh my God, it happened. It is true. So it's like a kind of new trend that we get. So guys, if you don't have any other comment.
Well, just on that point, I think what I think is healthy, and what I'm certainly doing myself and encouraging others to do, and in fact I'm doing a talk on this in a couple of weeks, is that we have to realize that we don't know very much, and that the sources of information are not necessarily reliable. So we have to be always willing to question things. You know, just be open-minded and say, well, at the moment I'm believing this, but, you know, I'm open to the fact I could be wrong, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
We have to be agnostic to the facts.
Yeah.
Do not have a belief in judging them. Okay, guys, it was a pleasure as always to exchange views. And by the way, it was quite a surprise that you were a Brexit fan, Peter.
See? Living proof.
You see, it
I
happened.
illustrate the point.
But that's the beauty about our talks, is that we can have different views, and we evolve with our own. And sometimes we get some doubts, then sometimes we get some certainties. That's a scientific process, by the way. So, guys, thank you very much for sharing, and see you next time.
Yeah. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.